Mark. Set. Shoot. Fire one. One's fired. Set. Shoot. Fire two. Two is fired. Set. Shoot. Fire three. Three is fired.
Dr. Pecce, you are the person who created the Club of Rome. What brought you to this initiative?
I am actually one of the founders of the Club of Rome. There is a group of scientists, humanists, educators, and businessmen who is very much concerned about the state of the world, the degrading situation of human society and the planet generally, who decided 3 years ago that something must be done in order to correct the present conduct of human affairs. The first meeting of these people was held in Rome. That is why we call ourselves the Club of Rome. No other reason. We are a group which is action-oriented. That is, we want to have an impact on things. But before trying to influence things, we think that it is necessary to understand why the situation is becoming every year, we think, worse in the world. While technology is having such a boom, why our knowledge is so immense, when our means are so powerful. Why, with this exceptional flourishing of material and intellectual possibilities, the situation of mankind is becoming every year less stable, more threatened.
You are looking for a system then?
Yes, we consider that it is impossible to approach what we call the predicament of mankind, the plight in which mankind finds itself, if we have not a systems approach to it. Let me try to explain. We are not confronted any longer by separate problems. We cannot say that we have economic and ecological and political, psychological and security problems. Each problem is a multifaceted problem.
Interconnected.
And each one interacts with the others. And many of these interactions are explosive. And these big problems, which become every year larger, more complex, make a bundle, a tangle of problems, what we call the problematic. And it is impossible to extract one single issue and deal with it.
That's what you call the holistic approach, the global.
Yes, we must first try to understand the whole of it. Therefore, it is called the holistic approach. And then from the general come to the particular. If we are more interested, say, in Europe, as we are Europeans, we cannot tackle Europeans' problems if we before do not understand which is the total situation in the planet. Europe is so much interdependent, interlinked with other areas of the world that to take Europe alone, as it was an island, it is totally unrealistic nowadays. This leads naturally, if we take a holistic approach, to consider the world as a unity, as a big system.
many of the most powerful traditions and goals in the world today revolve around the processes of growth. Growth in standard of living, economic growth, growth of populations, until very recent times, the expansion of geographical frontiers. Growth, in some sense, has dominated perhaps the last 1,000 years of history. Now, this growth is going to stop. It must stop, and it will stop. The only important question is by what process? What process will stop it? Will it be a natural process? Will it be brought to an end by pollution, by running out of food, by sheer crowding and the kinds of conflict and epidemics that may come from this? Or will this growth be brought into equilibrium by some more rational process that is less traumatic, less difficult than the great pressures that will arise if we depend only on the natural and social processes that now seem to be at work.
And that is what you are studying with this Club of Rome delegation?
That is the program which we are now carrying out here for the Club of Rome.
Professor Forrester, the problem seems then to be how to control the social and economic systems that mankind has created and does not completely conceive themselves.
Yes, you see, the problem here is that these systems are what we have come to call counterintuitive. They do not behave the way we think they do. And there are reasons for this. The human mind has gathered its intuition and its experience in dealing with simple systems. Simple systems like controlling bodily motion, picking one's feet up far enough that he does not trip over the threshold, filling a glass with water. Driving an automobile is about the most complex system that the human mind thoroughly grasps. And then, as we come to these more complex systems, we apply to them the lessons that we've learned in simple systems, but the more complex systems do not behave in the same way. And so we draw the wrong kinds of conclusions. We expect, for example, that cause and effect will be closely related in time and in space. If one trips over the threshold and falls down, it happens now. The reason is clear. It's because he stubbed his toe, and we expect this close coupling between cause and effect and the close coupling in time between when the cause occurs and when the effect occurs. But as one goes into the more complicated systems, one finds that there are no cause and effect simple relationships, that it's the structure of the entire system that gives it the behavior. No one thing causes something else, but the entire set of interactions produce the total behavior. So one cannot properly talk about cause and effect, and yet we do all the time in our newspapers, in all of our discussions. We have a total system which is giving a behavior that can be understood only if we link together all of the important parts and find out how that system creates the kinds of troubles, the kinds of difficulties which are bothering us today. And so there is a very great tendency for the intuitive approach, the judgment that we have developed over years, to cause us to come to the wrong conclusion about what to do in our social systems. Now, the danger in this is that if we believe we have a solution, and if that solution in fact makes matters worse, then as they get worse, we apply more of the solution, which makes things worse, which causes us to work harder on the fictitious or incorrect solution. And so one produces a downward spiral of actually driving the system into a continually worsening condition. And we see this all around us, in systems at all levels.
Professor Forster, maybe this is entirely not applicable what I would like to ask you now. But for instance, a situation like Vietnam, could that be an outcome of this constantly taking the wrong decision and finding the wrong solutions and getting further and deeper into this?
I would assume that the answer is yes, without having examined the kind of international political structure that is involved, without knowing precisely why this might be true, I would say yes. We find so often that the actions that we take to solve a problem actually make that problem worse, that it is at least a reasonable presumption that that could happen in a situation such as Vietnam. Without having made the study, without knowing exactly what that process actually is, I would expect there is a very strong chance that it would develop that there has been an orderly, systematic set of misjudgments on both sides that makes the problem worse and worse. We're working here on the dynamics of social systems, coming to a better understanding of the way in which our social systems behave. And what we seem to be discovering is the deficiency of the human mind in dealing with the dynamic, the time-varying behavior of a system as complicated as any of our social systems. These are far more complex systems than any of our engineering systems. And yet, if we try to understand an engineering system, we always build a model, we build a prototype, we do experiments in order to design it better. And our social systems are a great deal more complex
than technological systems.
Than the technological systems. And we find that the human mind perceives the parts of these systems very well, but it does not perceive the consequences of those parts interacting with each other.
The overall.
And so we are combining the great ability of the human mind to perceive the individual motivations, the individual actions within the system, and then we combine the policies, we combine the criteria or the rationale under which the various parts are working. We combine those into a system model which allows us to tell what happens when all of the separate pieces interact with each other. Now, that the computer does very well. The computer does not provide the original input information. It does not provide the perceptions on which a model is based. But it can trace through all of the interactions once we have given it the rules under which the various parts of the system seem to be acting.
In other words, you can construct in a laboratory a social system.
In effect, yes. And a lot of people believe this is impossible because they feel that one cannot make a model of anything as complicated as a social system. And of course, they are partially correct. A model is a great simplification. But we have no choice about the use of models. The mental image that we use for passing laws, for running cities, for operating a government, these mental images are models because one does not have a city or a country or a world in his head. He only has certain images which are models. And so the question now is that model adequate? Is it the best model which we can make? And the answer is no. It is not the best model which we can make.
It seems to me that Professor Forster is doing very interesting work at MIT. Particularly, I should like to refer to his studies on using management information systems for the decision-making and forecasting in all fields of enterprise activities.
That's your special field, management.
Yes, more or less. Incidentally, we have already translated into Russian one of his books, which is called Industrial Dynamics. Unfortunately, we do not know much about results of introducing Forrester's ideas, his concepts, into practice. I must also refer to his last work, which is done more with respect to social dynamics, he calls it. It is very difficult on this stage to evaluate what profit one can gain from this approach.
Too early.
It is a little bit too early, and we do not have enough information about it. Mr. Forrester thinks that it is a promising approach, but I would stress with this respect that when we deal with social systems, they are so complex and they need multidisciplinary approach to explain more or less these complicated phenomena. So from this point of view, I would rather emphasize necessity of complex multidisciplinary approaches to such problems like social systems.
You think that can be done with computers?
To a certain degree, these processes might be computerized, but it seems to me that exaggeration of the significance of computers when we deal with such complex things like scientific, social systems, where one must take into consideration sociological, psychological, and many other aspects which are not possible to be computerized. Otherwise, you must be actually based on very mechanical principles, which are oversimplifying the real existing complexity of this system.
We are talking here about a new profession, the profession of the dynamics of social systems. It is just as difficult to learn as law or engineering or medicine. There are no schools that are fully developed yet.
Correct.
It's just the beginning of a whole new frontier. I myself believe that it is a frontier as big and as important as the frontier of science and technology which we have been through over the last 40 or 50 years. These frontiers come, they are pioneered, and they recede into the fabric, the everyday behavior, everyday work of our society. And the question is, what frontier is next? What comes after the frontier of science and technology? Because science and technology is no longer a frontier. It has been pioneered. It is a part of everyday living. And what is the next frontier? I believe it will be this understanding of the nature of our social systems all the way from the family to international power politics. Well, our big problem now is to develop sufficiently able and trained people to deal with the tremendous number of problems that exist that people are proposing. We are being overwhelmed here to work on specific problems. We do not yet have a program that is fully developed, adequately financed, into which we can bring people for training, bring them up to the point where they can deal with those problems and questions. So it is the difficulty of starting a new field in which one must have people in order to do the work. One must do the work in order to develop interest so that he can train the people.
Professor Forrester, according to me, is a kind of genius who has been able to let through some techniques data of different origin, objective data, measurable data, and some data which come from the social and human sciences be put together and inserted in some computer technology, in some machines, in order to analyze complex social systems and have proper answers. His technology, systems, dynamics is well known, and I think it is the right step into a new direction.
So in other words, the Club of Rome will run somewhat parallel to the UNESCO of the United Nations.
Well, we hope to be even more global than UNESCO and the United Nations.
Political.
Yes, they are a political body. They are based on the present realities of the world, 126 states and a few
With China
states
excluded.
outside.
A few like
Yes.
China.
We would like to look forward to see which kind of world we can, our generation, in these years, in the crucial 1970s, imagine and build for our children, for ourselves. You are a young man, I am an old man, probably not for me, but for my children and grandchildren, yes.
I heard you speak of a psychoanalyst from Nigeria and another economist from Japan. So actually at the moment you are already working with various nationalities.
Oh yes, I should say better various cultures. We have many people from different parts of Africa, different parts from Latin America, from Japan, from other parts of Asia, and we hope dearly to have in the near future people from Eastern Europe who are generally with us, with their minds, with their wishes, but who have not yet joined us in our work, in our research, in our studies.
I've known Dr. Piché, one of its founders, for several years already. He has told me many times about plans of the Club of Rome, and I had the privilege of participating at one of the meetings of this club in Vienna. Some members of the club visited Moscow. As far as I understand, though it is now at its initial stage, it has already attracted the attention of scientists and scholars from different countries. That shows an increasing interest of the international scientific community to some global problems arising in particular from the development of scientific and technological revolution. The Club of Rome is trying, to my knowledge, to find ways to better understand and approach those problems. The work which is going on now under this club in MIT, I think is very interesting, and we send one of our scientists to participate in preparatory work which is done
In
by
Boston.
This. Yes.
So do you see, therefore, a future closer cooperation between the Soviet Academy of Science and an institution like the Club of Rome?
I would say yes. It is quite possible, provided we find common ground for discussions of the problems, which are of the interest to Soviet scientists and for an exchange of information. As you know, the USSR Academy of Sciences, our scientists and scientific organizations, have been actively cooperating with hundreds of international organizations, big and small ones, and with many countries on the bilateral basis. I do not exclude at all active participation of Soviet scientists in the Club of Rome's activities.
Could you tell us something about financing your efforts? Where does the money come from?
Yes, the Club of Rome, we want to be a free club without any influence. And therefore, as far as possible, we will refrain from receiving money from different governments, from different states. We'd like to cater funds from foundations, from corporations, to be as much equidistant from the different parts of the world as possible. Of course, financing is always a difficult thing. There are immense financial possibilities in this world, but I would say with very regret that it is generally conservative money, which is against innovation. The Club of Rome is in an innovating effort, and therefore we have financial troubles. But if we have good ideas, we will also get the money to carry them out.
The notion arose a few years ago, and the explorations have been proceeding now for, I guess, for 3 years. The idea is to create somewhere in Europe an organization which will be devoted to the use of systems analysis as an intellectual tool for improving the manner in which individual nations or groups of nations operate their economies, using the word economy in the grossest sense of the term. Systems analysis is an intellectual tool which has grown up in the years since World War II. It probably has more exponents of this art in the United States than in any other nation. And it can't be utilized successfully unless there are available a series of sine qua non. These include very large computers with fast memories, with large fast memories, a large database descriptive of some element of human society, the Rhine Valley and what goes up and down that valley, all elements of the weather over the Alps, some very large system of that sort. And then you require people, individuals, trained in systems analysis who understand how to use the data which can be made available and brought to bear on a given problem. The number of people who can do this is relatively limited, and our hope is to begin to develop an international institution where, at least at first, the focus of activity will be the methodology by which one could address these very large human problems. And the methodology should be equally valid in the capitalist nations of the Western world and the communist nations of the Eastern world, because we know no reason to think that systems analysis must be different. It should be able to cross this line and deal with these macro problems. It isn't clear yet in which nation we will locate this institution, but the conversations are going on at the present time involving 8 nations.
Could you mention, or are you in a position?
I think that the initial nations would include the United States, the Soviet Union, the United Kingdom, France, West Germany, East Germany, Poland, Italy. There is no reason to think that, however, that list is all-inclusive. As soon as the organization is in being, any other nation willing to contribute financially and in terms of its human resources, well, it's not that expensive, and I don't think it is not our intention to keep nations out. It's our intention to welcome them in. And I think it's more important that they can contribute human beings who have the skills that go with this kind of operation than that they contribute funds. The funds will not be that serious a problem as far as we can tell at the present time.
It seems to me that this is a very interesting idea to bring together interested countries, and particularly their interested organizations, that might contribute to multilateral study of these most complicated problems which are brought by very rapid development of science and technology today. What is particularly important from my point of view, to concentrate on methodological problems, how better we could grasp the complex idea and difficult idea of these processes. And from this point of view, I should mention that with Dr. Handler and with some other our counterparts in other countries, we actually started exchange of views whether we could create something on purely scientific basis that might help and that might contribute to better cooperation in system analysis, in particular applied system analysis, and to give chance to all the countries that will participate in it better chance of using most modern methods and techniques of dealing with these problems.
And Dr. Vishana, this would also include probably the exchange of scientific information so that the Americans and the Russians, and vice versa, the Russians and the Americans tell each other as much as they can about their scientific research and exchange that information. That would also be an aspect of it, probably.
Of course, one of the purposes must be that, though even now there is to a certain degree such an exchange of information between Western scientists and American scientists and Soviet scientists. But the degree of these exchanges are not sufficient if you face the difficult problems which are matter of discussion. And better cooperation in this field definitely will be for the benefit of the whole humanity.
Komt er ook een ondervertakking in Nederland? Een dependance van de club?
Dat is wel de bedoeling. Ik heb tot dusver nog weinig in Nederland gedaan eraan om andere Nederlanders voor te interesseren, omdat ik dacht, Nederland is een land waar men graag de kat uit de boom kijkt. En bovendien is de Nederlander heel concreet. Die wil eerst eens weten, wat stelt het nou eigenlijk allemaal voor? Zolang het alleen nog maar in de praatfase is, dacht ik dat de meeste Nederlanders er toch nog niet in geïnteresseerd zouden zijn. En ik wilde dus afwachten. Ik wilde liever afwachten tot in september ons eerste rapport uitkomt. Dan is er een concreet resultaat, al is het nog maar een eerste begin. En dat leek me dan het goede moment om eens een groep Nederlanders bijeen te roepen die in dit onderwerp geïnteresseerd zijn. En dan is aan de hand van het rapport nader te praten. En eventueel om een soort Nederlandse onderafdeling te vormen. Er zijn verschillende landen waar al zo'n landelijke afdeling bestaat. Bijvoorbeeld een hele actieve groep in Japan. En dat zou dan een eerste begin kunnen zijn om ook in Nederland meer belangstelling voor dit onderwerp te krijgen.
Ziet u ook een Nederlandse belangstelling op regeringsniveau in de richting van dat integreren van die wereldproblemen, wat die Club of Rome zo probeert te doen?
Ja. Ik dacht dat voor een succesvol internationaal samenspel, en ik ben het met u eens, zonder dat komen we er niet. De problemen waarmee we mee te maken hebben zijn niet aan grenzen gebonden. Ze zijn internationaal en ze zijn haast worldwide op het gebied van voedsel, op het gebied van zeevervuiling, waarover we net in Den Haag een conferentie hebben gehad. Dat zijn alleen maar internationaal oplosbare problemen. Maar willen wij tot een goed internationaal samenspel komen, dan dacht ik dat we in ieder geval in ons eigen land een platform moeten hebben geconstrueerd waarop wij in staat zijn, op basis waarvan wij in staat zijn om onze landelijke inbreng te leveren in het internationale gebeuren. Maar ik ben het met u eens, dat internationale verband dat is uitermate belangrijk en daardoor spreekt me ook dat initiatief van de 8 landen bepaald erg aan. En wat dat betreft heb ik de heer Péché gevraagd op welk moment hij denkt dit soort methoden, dit soort gedachten, dit soort mogelijkheden over te dragen aan politieke organen, internationale politieke organen, waarbij het streven moet zijn, dacht ik, om het neer te leggen bij dergelijke organen waarvan men daadwerkelijke actie mag verwachten, omdat men begrijpt, Verenigde Naties, maar ik denk wellicht ook aan de wat meer regionaal georiënteerde politieke organen, waarbij natuurlijk één punt ons wat dwars zit, namelijk dat het overdragen bijvoorbeeld aan de OECD, die zich erg veel met wetenschapsbeleid en zeer actief met wetenschapsbeleid heeft geoccupeerd, ons weer terugbrengt in de westelijke hoek. Terwijl en de Club van 8 en de Club van Rome en het initiatief van de 8 juist een West-Oost-verbinding ligt.
Professor Forster, could we take leave of you by asking you, you are optimistic then with this new development as a constructive way of solving these urgent problems of mankind?
Well, I'm optimistic about there being better ways in which to operate our social systems, but we must temper that with the statement that there are no utopias. In other words, any systems that we know of are systems that are going to be under pressure, that are less than ideal, that will not be as good as perhaps we would like to imagine, but perhaps a great deal better than they are going to be if we don't understand them.
Dr. Peche, how hopeful are you that you can establish this kind of relationship between scientists and humanists in the world to do this, to improve the management of mankind?
I am fundamentally an optimist, although I would say that presently I have rather pessimistic feelings about our capacity to understand the present situation of the world. But I think that through many endeavors which are popping up here and there in the world, and through also the sensitivity of some parts of the human population, especially the young one, I think that a new awareness, a new concern about the future, the immediate or further on future is growing up. So I do not rule out that finally we will become sane enough to see that there must be cooperation. I think that the dynamic, the decisive factors in the world will be the scientific community, including humanists, educators, that is the intelligentsia of the world.